So if you call yourself a Christian, how did you come to faith? Who was that person for you? Hey, welcome back to our study on the book of Revelation. We're having so much fun as we make sense of this book. It's this strange, beautiful, complex book that actually has a lot to say to us today. So if you call yourself a Christian, how did you come to faith? For me, it was my mom. Both of my parents were committed Christians, but my mom, she just had this way about her all the time. My mom, she would make sure that we said dinner prayers and bedtime prayers, and she would read her Bible faithfully, and she participated in Bible studies at church all the time. She taught Sunday school, did all the things that you would expect a Christian mom to sort of do. But when I think about how my mom passed the faith on to me and to my siblings, I think it made all the difference in the world to me that she was what I would call a God spotter. It wasn't that she attended church or did these church things, but she was a God spotter in my everyday life. My mom, she seemed to just sense God's presence in everything. She'd hear a song on the radio and she'd say, "Kids, oh God, that is exactly what I needed to hear today." Or she'd point out a bird in a nest and say, "Oh, kids, that's God. I just needed to remember that all things grow and change." For my mom, there was no such thing as a coincidence ever. Only God working in and through all things for the reconciliation of all humanity. My mom, she modeled this kind of mysticism, this kind of emotional gut connection to God, to the divine. And this is how I've learned to live my life. I didn't even know that was happening to me or that it was different from what other people experienced. But my mom, she ingrained that into me. What her faith did to me was to help me to better see God's activity in my everyday life. So here's my question for you. Who was that person for you? How did you come to faith? What actions did they take in order to model and lead you to where you are today? Here today, we're talking about Revelation chapter 11. And John of Patmos, he's invited to do this weird thing. He's invited to measure the temple of God and the altar of those who worship there. Now, a lot of people, they read these words in chapter 11, and they start to imagine that a third temple will be built in Jerusalem. There were the first two temples, both the second temple torn down, but then the third temple here in Jerusalem. They imagine an actual physical temple. But here's the thing, that doesn't actually align with the rest of Scripture, and it probably doesn't align to what John of Patmos believed either. Jesus, if you remember, tells his disciple Peter that Peter is the rock on which the church will be built. Paul, in his books, he writes that our bodies are the temple of God and of Jesus. The witnesses that we read about in Revelation chapter 11, they're actually not physical temple builders, but they're the community of believers that have come together to proclaim a great message. Now, I want you to remember what this message is all about. We talked about the scrolls in the previous chapters, and the scrolls, they taste both sweet and bitter. My friends, following a life of Jesus is both sweet and bitter. Both sweet in that we get to experience the love, the freedom, the mercy, the grace of Jesus Christ. But there's also bitter sometimes, if we're really, really honest. It's hard for us to try and talk about with our friends and family. It's hard for us to convince other people to believe. And many people in the past, they've been persecuted for believing in Jesus. And sometimes, if you're living a life of faith and you're trying to follow what God is calling you to do, just like John of Patmos, sometimes you're called to go do very, very difficult things. Maybe you're drawn to go care for somebody who you'd rather not care for, or maybe you're asked to give of yourself instead of keeping to yourself. Or sometimes, if we're honest for us, these things are really hard for us. Maybe God is calling us to go give something away when we really want to just keep our own money to ourselves and buy a new boat. Or maybe some days you'd rather sleep in than get up and go and volunteer. There's a risk sometimes involved in following Jesus, and it's both sweet and bitter at the same time. But you can see how in Revelation chapter 11, how these witnesses that are going to tell people about Jesus, in chapter 11, they are persecuted and they are killed. And I want you to remember back when we started talking about the introduction, this letter, Revelation, was sent to churches, to 7 churches that were experiencing persecution. So this is an encouragement for them. that their witness, that their commitment to the sweet, bitter good news of the gospel, that is what builds this temple of witnesses. And think about it. Christianity is the largest world religion today, so they did their work, because otherwise you and I wouldn't be here at all. So here's my questions for you today as you dive into chapter 11. Number 1, who is a witness to you when it comes to your faith? And number 2, who have you been a witness to? Who have you shared your faith or tried to model your faith to for someone? Hey, thanks so much for joining us for this week 3 of the book of Revelation, making sense of the book of Revelation. We're so honored that you are here. Come back tomorrow and we'll unpack chapter 12.